It is early autumn 82 BC, and throughout Italy, armies of what chroniclers will come to call the Populares and Optimati parties have been mired in the first real civil war of Rome's history. From the Greek-speaking cities of the south to the plains of Cisalpine Gaul in the north, tens of thousands of citizens and auxiliary allies lie dead, killed in an increasingly savage bloodletting of fratricidal slaughter. Two men began this war, former allies and friends against whom no enemy of Rome could stand: Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. But now Marius has met his demise, and it is his allies who cannot stand against the increasingly ascendant forces of Sulla. At Arminium, the headquarters of the anti-Sullan faction, General of the Lucanian Legion Publio Albinovanus invites the proconsul Gaius Norbanus and his staff to a dinner, at which possible strategies to turn around the war effort will hopefully be fleshed out and put into action. Norbanus himself cannot attend the dinner, but his staff officers, along with high-ranking members of Consul Gnaeus Papirius Carbo's command, follow Albinovanus's invitation and arrive for what they hope will be a convivial and productive discussion and repast. The dinner, however, turns into a scene of horror, for no sooner have the anti-Sullan officers taken their seats than knives and blades are brandished, and every single one is cut down and killed in cold blood. The gore-splattered walls and slick floor resemble those of an abattoir, grimly symbolic of a once lustrous and free republic, coldly and assuredly lurching towards its own execution. Before we get into today's story, I want to take a moment to talk about our sponsor, Kinzer Coins. If you're someone who loves ancient history, archaeology, or the civilizations we talk about on this channel, Kinzer Coins offers something genuinely unique: the chance to own a real piece of the past. Kinzer Coins specializes in authentic ancient coins from civilizations like ancient Rome, Greece, and the biblical era. These aren't replicas or novelty items. They're real coins that were struck, circulated, and used thousands of years ago. Some of them would have passed through the hands of soldiers, merchants, or everyday people living through the very events we discuss here. What makes Kinzer Coins especially interesting is that you don't need to be a high-end collector or spend a fortune to get started. They offer genuine ancient coins at approachable entry-level prices, making history something you can actually own, not just admire from afar. Each coin is clearly described and certified for authenticity, so you know exactly what you're getting and where it comes from. If you've ever wanted to hold history in your hands, head over to the link in the description and use code HISTORYMARSH to save 10% on your first order. For Sulla, the Arminium massacre is nothing of the sort, for it is his firm belief that his war is lancing and cauterizing the wound caused by Marius's megalomaniacal lust for power. The conflict began, after all, when Sulla was legally and legitimately awarded the command of the Eastern Army, following his success in the social war against the rebelling Italian subject cities of Rome. Marius and his allies, unable to either let go of power and willing to break all respectable conventions of the Roman state, underhandedly stole his position and placed non-Roman Italians on the citizen roll to guarantee electoral success. Sulla insists that his entire campaign has been to restore what was always rightfully his, along with the true path of the Roman state and its mos maiorum tradition of precedent and custom. With the eradication of the majority of Carbo and Norbanus's high command, and the subsequent handover of Arminium with its massive stockpiles of supplies and treasure, Norbanus himself flees and manages to catch ship to Rhodes in Greece. At around the same time, word filters to Sulla that two legions under Marcus Terentius Varro Lucullus have overcome a much larger force under Lucius Cornelius at Faventia, creating 18,000 casualties for the enemy in a battle where an autumn wind at the outset had blown flowers from nearby onto the Sullan troops, making it appear they were crowned with garlands. The war in the north is largely over as a result, though Carbo remains at large and dangerous. Along with him, Gaius Marius the Younger is still besieged at Praeneste, where all attempts to either capture the city or break the siege have failed. If this were all that opposed Sulla, he would rest easy in anticipation of time and fortune doing their work and delivering victory for him. But from those lands with ancient antipathy to Rome, there is news of a most concerning nature. Samnium and Lucania have risen against Sulla. From his base at Clusium, Carbo dispatches another 2 legions to move south and attempt to break the blockade of Praeneste and free up the anti-Sullan southern army, as well as the powerful figurehead of Gaius Marius the Younger. But these units fare no better than the previous columns sent by the same means. The legions commanded by Brutus Damasippus run afoul of Sulla's younger protege, Gnaeus Pompey, not far from their starting point, and he halts them in their tracks and seemingly blocks any possible movement forward. This is enough for the authorities of Cisalpine Gaul, whom Carbo and the other anti-Sullan leaders had depended on due to Sulla's opposition to extending them the rights of citizenship. Now Metellus Pius accepts the surrender of the region, and the whole of the northern peninsula passes into Sulla's hands. Carbo, still with numerous legions at Clusium, as well as separate forces under Gaius Carinus, Marcus Censorinus, and Brutus Damasippus's immobilized army, also has the now 70,000-strong Samnite and Lucanian army with which to ally himself. But the seemingly endless defeats over the past year and the loss of the north finally strip him of his nerve. Leaving those senior officers in charge, Carbo makes an escape to Sicily with the intention of moving on to Africa, the third anti-Sullan commander to leave Italy after Quintus Sertorius moved to Spain and Norbanus fled to Rhodes. He abandons his officers to endure an all-out assault by Pompey that is epic in scale and costs the anti-Sullans 20,000 men. With Pompey now the master of Clusium, the remaining die-hard elements of Carbo's former force move as best as they can for the south and Samnium, the only region in Italy where they might find respite to regroup. Linking up with the Samnite army, they march yet again to break the siege of Praeneste, a tactic that has now failed on several separate occasions since Sulla bottled Marius the Younger up in the town the previous April. Despite the late October chill, Sulla can now return from the northern front from where he has been campaigning in Etruria, and he moves quickly, with Pompey traversing further to the east. With a smaller and more agile force, Sulla manages to place himself in a narrow pass between the horde-like Samnite army and his commander Quintus Lucretius Afella, who has been commanding the Sullan siege forces. The anti-Sullan focus on freeing Marius arose first due to the perceived importance of having both a southern and northern field army to keep Sulla off balance, but now Marius is the only commander remaining in Italy with the authority and legitimacy to lead the war effort. Not only is he the son of the illustrious hero that originally began the conflict with Sulla, but he is also the current presiding consul. It is imperative that he be freed. In spite of their numbers, Sulla's force holds by using the advantageous terrain of the pass, nullifying the Samnite masses. Worse for the Samnites and the anti-Sullan remnants, Pompey is now hurtling toward them from the eastern side, ready to crash into their rear lines and flatten them like a hammer while Sulla acts the anvil. In a hurried conference, the Samnite leaders Pontius Telesinus, Marcus Lamponius, and Gutta sit down with Carinus, Brutus, and Marcus Censorinus and desperately attempt to come up with a new plan. Aware that another withdrawal is tantamount to surrender, they search the map for options, and then the gods seem to deliver inspiration: Rome. Lightly defended by a Sullan garrison, the Eternal City is effectively unguarded as Metellus remains in the north, Sulla clamped in place, and Pompey roams in the eastern center of the peninsula. A skillful and concealed withdrawal from the front with Sulla and a forced wide march would bring the Samnites to the city, and the Roman officials accompanying them could reassert their legitimacy, and a war would swing in their favor once more. The greater part of the Western Empire, Spain, Sicily, and Africa, is still in their hands after all. It is a plan ingenious in its simplicity. Telesinus puts it in motion immediately. Tens of thousands of Samnites march in the night, stealing a day on Sulla, who must wait to extricate himself from his bastion, and then ascertain the enemy's new objective. It is not long in revealing itself to him. With no other major army close by or capable of intercepting the Samnites, Sulla puts his own veterans to a forced march, the fate of their home city resting on their success. The Samnites have thus far conducted their campaign with a vicious practice of plunder and burning, born of resentment at decades of subservience and violent Roman oppression. Now, fortune seems to have put the fate of the city that plagues them in their vengeful hands. Their army appears before Rome's walls like a teeming mass of monsters, their companies covering the horizon from end to end. This is the most dangerous moment for Rome since the slaughter of Cannae almost a century and a half past. Romans have long thought themselves unassailable. Even the disaster of the Arausio a generation ago took place in Gaul, and not in Italy. Now, the people who conquered the entire Mediterranean look on from the Servian wall as their most ancient enemy forms into battle lines just a mile from their homes. The Roman historian Marcus Velleius Paterculus would later record that Telesinus hates the Romans to his very core, and as his men make their preparations to camp for the night, he delivers the following speech to them. "The last day is at hand for the Romans," Telesinus says. "These wolves that made such ravages upon Italian liberty will never vanish until we have cut down the forest that harbors them." But the Romans, the descendants of wolves as Telesinus correctly points out, are not conquered yet, and when the Samnites have settled for the night near the Colline gate, a party of citizens and soldiers slip out in the dark and launches a mounted sortie on the invaders. The Romans drive into the pickets of the Samnites with good numbers, several thousands, and there is much fighting. But the Samnites are in the far greater proportion, hold their nerve, and the assault ends in failure and withdrawal for the lucky few back into the city. Rome has given the message that it will not succumb quietly to obliteration, though its streets and temples now fill with wails of mourning for the dead. The next morning, the Samnites collect themselves and redeploy for battle, but before they can advance on the trepidatious defenders, 700 of Sulla's advance cavalry arrive and put themselves between the walls and the attackers. The cavalry managed to delay the Samnite advance long enough that Sulla's main force of legionaries are able to catch up after a tremendous forced march and put themselves in the mile of ground between Rome and the Samnites. Sulla has the army form an improvised defensive line, and then they are served food. But his commanders' entreaties that they be allowed to rest after their exhaustive journey are squashed. They will fight, and they will win, Sulla says, observing the impressive companies of the enemy. So it is that the Sullans advance. Marcus Licinius Crassus, who has played second fiddle to Gnaeus Pompey throughout the Italian campaign, takes the right wing, while Sulla himself commands the left. The Sullans are almost certainly outnumbered, and they are fatigued, but they are a cohesive core of fighting men, so used to battling and emerging victorious after years under the standard, that defeat is not a consideration. The battle commences with the exchange of missiles, slings and javelins flying through the air, while the infantry at the center come to grips with one another. After months of fighting fellow Romans in battles across the peninsula, Sulla's men relish the prospect of gutting a non-Latin enemy, even an Italian one, with the safety of Rome itself as a backdrop, no less. Very quickly, however, the night and morning's rest and the extra rations awarded to the Samnites begins to tell, and Sulla's left wing comes under severe pressure. The closest companies to the Colline gate, they are the prime target of the Samnite attackers, and Sulla himself is forced to ride forward into the maw of the fighting and rally his legionaries forward. At the sight of their general on his white horse, the Romans rally, but Sulla is just as visible to the Samnites, and missiles and attackers rain toward him. He retreats, a spear running through the hairs of his horse's tail, and he leaves with a parting appeal to his men to stand firm. This is too much to ask from them, and in their exhaustion, Sulla's left wing breaks, and men in their thousands begin streaming back toward the Colline gate. The sentries on the wall watch this implosion with terror, and the order is given to drop the portcullis, in spite of the fellow citizens who are begging for shelter against the marauding Samnites. Legionaries, and even according to legend, some senators are killed by the falling gate, and Sulla is once more in the midst of his panicked men, urging them to fight on and threatening those who are deaf to inspiration. The Samnites are merciless, but somehow Sulla and the remnants of his left wing fight their way back from the gate to their camp by the Temple of Venus. There, a blood and muck-stained Sulla sits in rueful contemplation of what he believes was his folly, driving his men to fight after already propelling them on foot across the country. The battle having started well into the afternoon, dusk is now falling, and Sulla believes that in the same fashion, fortune's grace has also faded toward him. At that moment, a messenger rushes into his tent. The man has been sent by Crassus. Unbeknownst to Sulla, who assumed that his army has fallen in its entirety, Crassus has not only held his ground, but chased the enemy from the field. He has pursued them to the hamlet of Antemne and intends to carry on into the night, but he respectfully asks Sulla whether his men can take their supper first. Realizing that the battle has in fact been won when he thought all lost, Sulla leaps up and gives orders for a general counterattack. The regrouped and re-energized Sullans launch themselves at the Samnites, and this time Telesinus is badly injured and the enemy line breaks. Once more the man who has come to call himself Felicitas emerges triumphant. No surviving chronicle records whether Crassus received his dinner. The aftermath of the Battle of the Colline Gate is bloody. Sulla has all captured Samnites executed, 6,000 or more, and the captured commanders, Telesinus, Marcinus, and Carinus, are put to death. It is said that Telesinus is found some way from the field, with a look of contentment at a great deed done, rather than fear of his impending demise. Unimpressed, Sulla has his head put on a spear with the others, and then sends them to be presented to Marius the Younger at Praeneste. After so many fruitless and costly attempts to break the Sullan siege, Marius now realizes that all is lost, and he ends his life in the Roman manner. In Rhodes, Norbanus does the same. Sulla is now undisputed master of Rome and Italy. Entering Rome, he declares himself dictator and takes the unprecedented step of putting up lists of those whose lives are forfeit, and blood flows through the streets. Pompey is dispatched to Sicily with an enormous army and fleet to track down Carbo, while plans are put in place to deal with Sertorius in Spain. Sulla will eventually relinquish his power and return to life as a private citizen, enjoying arts, the theatre, and drinking parties, claiming that it was he who saved the Republic. But one incident takes place before his resignation that causes some perceptive observers a momentary contemplation. A young man from an old and well-regarded Roman family is brought before Sulla for judgment. Marius had been married to his aunt and thus regarded as his uncle. He himself has also married a relative of Cinna, Sulla's great enemy, and thus presents a potential threat to the dictator. And it is up to Sulla to decide what to do with him. Sulla orders him to divorce his wife, but the boy refuses. He wishes no harm on Sulla, but as a free Roman, no one interferes with his family. The two stare at one another, and perhaps because enough citizens have been killed and he avoids harming other patricians where possible, Sulla relents and allows the young man to leave his presence. He warns any within earshot, however, that the boy has many Mariuses within him. Defiant, but certainly not dim-witted, the young man keeps a low profile for a long time afterward, though after facing down the great dictator of Rome, he fears no one for the rest of his life. His name is Gaius Julius Caesar. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.